Good Thursday morning, everyone. We've got, I think, the most beautiful image of all the Thoth Tarot cards. This is the Princess of Discs. Now, the princesses, the court cards represent the Yod He Vav He formula, the father, mother, son, daughter formula of the great name of God in Kabbalah. And the princesses represent that second and final He in Yod He Vav He. And when we're talking about the tarot, using tarot as flashcards to try to have a discussion about Kabbalah, we'd have the four suits of the lesser arcana, wands, cups, swords, and discs, represented as like four trees of life, one on top of the other. Tree of life for wands and yod, a tree of life for cups and hay, a tree of life for swords and vav, and a tree of life for the discs and the final hay. And then there's four court cards within each of those suits, and those would be like mini fractal Yod He Vav He's. King, queen, prince, princess, or knight, queen, prince, princess. And we could look at the whole thing as trying to wrap our meat brains around how all of this stuff and all of these qualities and all of these forces and all of these energies and all of this stuff that makes up the universe, how that all ultimately goes back to the singularity of Godhead. How did the singularity, or how did God go about making all this stuff? And in order to wrap their Kabbalistic meat brains around it, the Kabbalists said, well, let's try to look at this in four parts. And those four parts, of course, is what they're trying to do with that great name of God. Now, if we imagine that this was light, that the supreme singularity consciousness that is ultimately behind absolutely everything, if we imagined it as pure light, then each of those little emanations, the little bubbles there at the end of these hastily drawn trees of life, were like prisms that separate that light into lower, grosser, darker frequencies of light until finally they hit rock bottom down there at the 10. That'd be the 10 of discs, or in the court card language, the princess of discs. That's why I've got the princess of discs on the cover, because she's where the magic takes place. Because, to quote Shakespeare, you can't get no lower than that. Something has to happen down there on the final hay of the final hay to jumpstart the entire process and relight the singularity to start the process again. That right there, that little tiny, that's where the magic happens. And it's going to happen. Crowley tries to show how that happens in his discussion of the Princess of Discs, in his discussion of the 10 of Discs, and what Hermes Trismegistus tried to explain when he says, as above, so below, that which is above is that which is below. Now, when you think about it, if the pure light was right up there and then beaming down and getting slower and grosser and darker as it goes down there. Everything in between the number 1 at the top and the number 10 at the bottom, everything in between doesn't have a full range of that vibratory frequency. There's only 2 places that exists, and those 2 places are 1. Everything exists up here in the first singularity, and then little bits of absolutely everything else also is also found down there. It's like a wine vintage. Okay, you got a bunch of grapes growing out there, and it's just the best vintage for wine. The conditions were just perfect. And you take the grapes to the squeezer machine, and you squeeze the grapes out, and you make 4 different levels of quality of wine out of that particular vintage. And the very highest level is really expensive, and it's so pure, and it's clean, and it's pure, and it's clear, and everything else. But you still got a lot of good grapes going for you. And so there is a second level of that vintage. This is theoretical, and I don't think this is chemistry. But then you got a little lower level, and you can sell that at cheaper wine places, and it's still really good, you know. But then there's the third level, and it's all from the same vintage, okay, but there's a third, less pure level, and you sell that at Trader Joe's and things like that. And then finally, at the very, very bottom is the stems and the sludge and the skins and the bugs. And it's still from that same vintage, okay? And not only that, but if you really know how to fiddle with it chemically, you can clone back, if you will, all of those other levels. There's not much stuff to work with, but it's there. That there-ness does not exist in the Trader Joe's vintage or the Better Wine Shop vintage or the Supreme vintage. It's not all there, because the lowest of the low isn't in those middle management levels. It's only in the lowest level. It's only there. That's why the Kabbalists say Kether, number 1, is in Malkuth, number 10. And Malkuth is in Kether, only after a different manner. As above, so below. Now, this is not a one-way street. Yod-He Vav-He is an alternating current. Yod-He Vav-He, Hey Vav, Hey Yod. And they're going like this at all times. It's the alternating current that vibrates the big Om, okay? Anyway, that's what I'm telling you. So there must be some huge, huge magic that goes on down there in the 10 of discs and down there in the Princess of discs that they represent, that is enabling the magician, the mystic, to redistill the lowest of the low, to heat it up with a gentle heat with much attention, to separate the spiritus, the spirit from the earth, and start the whole process over again. Crowley quotes that, and I'll read it to you straight from the beast's mouth. It says, the climax, the general doctrine that the climax of the descent of matter signals the redintegration, the climax of the descent of matter into matter. The climax of the descent of spirit into matter signals its redintegration. And I put the correct quote up. Let me get it correctly for you here. He talks about it when he talks about the hermit. Compare the 10 of discs and the general doctrine that the climax of the descent of matter is the signal for the redintegration of spirit. And redintegration is sort of an archaic word. For years I read it as reintegration. I go, well, but redintegration is a process of taking a part of the whole and recreating the whole. Returning to the former estate by just having enough of a complete piece of the original estate to clone it back to its original. Pretty damn cool. Well, anyway, part of that magic that's taking place down there, Crowley calls it the mode of operation of the great work. And he tries to explain it alchemically. And when people start to explain things alchemically to me, oh, you're noticing my T-shirt. It's my the Atlantis bookshop 100th anniversary this year. And last time I went there, when was that? 2008. They made me up with the Lawn in London tour T-shirt. I have to give it a plug. Happy birthday, Geraldine. No, you're not 100 years old, but your bookstore shop is. Okay, but I digress. Crowley says that the mode of operation of the great work, so what he's talking about is what kind of magic is going on, what kind of alchemy is going on there in the lowest of the low that jumpstarts the whole process over again. And he tries to explain it alchemically by saying these are the main characters in that operation: Mercury, Sol, the sun, and Earth. Now, just remember that for a while, because that's going to be part of the big punchline. And if we don't finish, what time is it? Oh, God. I'm sorry, everyone. If we don't finish this today, we'll get to the punchline eventually. I'm going to read what Crowley says in the Book of Thoth about the Princess of Discs. The Princess of Discs is the last of the court cards. It represents the earthy part of Earth. She is consequently on the brink of transfiguration. She is strong and beautiful, with an expression of intense brooding, as if about to become aware of a secret wonder. Her crest is the head of a ram. Her scepter descends into the earth. There its head becomes a diamond, the precious stone of Kether. Now, excuse me while I digress. Her wand tip is a diamond. Diamond is the stone of Kether, the very top. But diamonds are made of pure carbon. And carbon is the earth of earth. Kether is in Malkuth, as Malkuth is in Kether, only after a different manner. There its head becomes a diamond. Oh, well, let's see if I can, if that's in this image. Yeah, there's the image there, right there in the, she's helping advertise that book, obviously. Oh, notice that the diamond is also two tetrahedrons, or the crystal of carbon, two tetrahedrons placed on top of each other. Now imagine if that the floor of the top tetrahedron is the ceiling, well, is also the floor of the bottom tetrahedron in Averse universes. Imagine an altar that reaches right through the floor. But that's something else to think about. Anyway, especially when you think about the very mysterious ritual called Liber Pyramidos. But I digress. Let's see. There it becomes a diamond, the precious stone of Kether, thus symbolizing the birth of the highest and purest light in the deepest and darkest of the elements. She stands within a grove of sacred trees before an altar, suggesting a wheat sheaf, for she is the priestess of Demeter. She bears within her body the secret of the future. Her sublimity is further emphasized by the disk which she bears. For in the center thereof is the Chinese ideogram denoting the twin spiral force of creation in perfect equilibrium. From this is born the rose of Isis, the great fertility mother. The characteristics of an individual. Now, earlier on, she talks about the princesses as a group, what the princesses might represent. And I'm going to turn back there if I can find it fast enough for us this morning. The princesses represent the hay final of the name. They represent the ultimate issue of the original energy. That's why she's the throne of the ace. So they represent the ultimate issue of the original energy in its completion, its crystallization, its manifestation. So in other words, the princess is the ace made manifest. DuQuette threw that in. They also represent the counterbalancing, the reabsorption of the energy. They represent the silence into which all things return. And they are thus at the same time permanent and non-existent. An audit of the equation is 0 equals 2. The princesses have no zodiacal attribution, yet eventually they represent 4 types of human being. They are those numerous elemental people who we recognize by their lack of all sense of responsibility, whose moral qualities seem to lack bite. They are subdivided according to planetary predominances. Such types have been repeatedly described in fiction. As Eliphas Levi wrote, "The love of the magus for such creatures is insensate and may destroy him." The relations between these 4 elements of the name are extraordinarily complex, quite beyond the limits of any ordinary treatise to discuss. They change with every application of thought to their meaning. And he's sort of speaking about how they're treated in a divination or a fortune-telling type thing. For instance, no sooner has the princess made her appearance than the prince wins her in marriage, and she is set upon the throne of her mother. She thus awakens the eld of the original old king, who thereupon becomes a young knight, and so renews the cycle. The princess is not only the perfect maiden, but owing to the death of the prince, the forsaken, lamenting widow. All this occurs in the legends characteristic of the Aeon of Osiris. It is hardly possible, definitely, to disentangle these complications, but for the student is sufficient if he will be content to work with one legend at a time. It is natural that the Aeon of Osiris, the regime of air, of strife, of intellect, should be thus confused, as its symbols and formulae should overlap, should contradict each other. It is impossible to harmonize the multitudinous fables or parables, because each was invented to emphasize some formula that was regarded as imperative to serve some local or temporal purpose. That's why we shouldn't get too crazy trying to fit every cosmic truth into everybody's particular legends. This is where I totally lose patience with people that use only the Bible narratives, the stories, to try to explain everything when they should be satisfied with they simply explaining some things. Okay, anyway, I'm going to go on a little bit here. Let's see, the characteristic of an individual symbolizes cards are too various to enumerate. One must summarize by saying she is womanhood in its ultimate projection. She contains all characteristics of woman, and it would depend entirely upon the influences to which she is subjected whether one or another become manifest. But in every case, her attributes will be pure in themselves and not necessarily connected with any of the attributes in which, in a normal way, one regards as symbolic. So just listen to what Lon said a minute ago. Okay. Crowley says from beyond the grave. No, somebody's going to take that serious. Don't. I'm joking. Sorry. But in every case, her attributes will be pure in themselves and not necessarily connected with any other attributes in which one normally regards as symbolic. In one sense, her general reputation will be of bewildering inconsistency. It's rather like a lottery wheel from which the extraction of any number does not predict or influence the result of any subsequent operation. The fruit of the philosophy of Thelema are enjoyed, rare, ripe, nourishing, and vitalizing at its highest and fullest in this meditation. 4. To the adept, everything. For to the adept, every turn of the wheel is equally probable and equally a prize. For every event is the play of new wheat. Okay. That's where I'm going to end today. I'm going to pick this up, and we're going to look a little bit more carefully about this thing that Crowley calls the general doctrine of the climax of the descent of matter. And it may answer a few questions for those that want to know why the princesses don't rule 30-degree periods of the zodiac like her other court card family, and why Malkuth is very important, and why the pyramid is a temple of initiation and a tomb, and why it's a mistake to think that matter and earth is a tomb we must escape from, when indeed it is the rocket ship we must escape with. Okay. Yes, you not only can, but you must take it with you. Until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Happy birthday, the Atlantis bookshop in London. Stop in, visit, buy a few, just buy anything, but I think you'll see a couple of my titles there too. Until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.